Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I are here for another episode of Overtime Hockey Talk. And on today's episode, as the Montreal Canadiens have recently packed up house and fired everybody in their executive branch of their team, we thought it appropriate to talk about them and other teams that have the potential to have a little firing squad going on in their organization. So, Justin, before we dive into all that, I know that you're back to doing Glory of Christmas, a big Christmas production at your church, and we're not talking like, hey, here's like a few hundred people that come to this. This is like, how many people come to Glory of Christmas?
Oh my gosh, I think the year before, 2 years ago, pre-COVID, when we did it, we did 12 shows or 11 shows and had 35,000 tickets sold.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's like all of Metro Detroit that would possibly go to a Christmas show. There you go. You've got going on. Yeah. So how's that going?
Oh my gosh, that's been it's been crazy, but I will say it actually is a little less crazy than it normally is. So usually, for those who don't know, so this big Glory Christmas play is basically like we do two big acts. One is like all Santa reindeer stuff, and then the second half is obviously the nativity stuff. But typically we do rehearsals and stuff starting in August, September, and it all leads up to now. And so because of COVID, they really didn't do any of that stuff. So we just kind of jumped right into it, like I'd say about a month and a half ago, and just went full force. And
oh, really? I didn't know that you hadn't been rehearsing for very long.
No. So there's it's funny because really with the orchestra we have this huge orchestra that we hire out and bring in. So there's maybe like 30, 40 orchestra pieces down in the pit of our church here. And I think maybe we got 4 rehearsals in with everybody, and that was it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's not a lot for what the production is. That's not a lot.
Yeah. It's like, it's a 2.5 hour production, that we throw on there. So it's crazy. And
do they have a lot of people from past years so that and do the same thing? So everybody kind of is like, all right, I'm familiar with what's happening. Yeah,
pretty much. That's okay. Yeah. I think we changed one song this year. That was it. Everything else stayed the same. So of course it was my wife's solo song that they changed. And so they gave her a new song to do. And
she's the only person in the whole thing that had to learn something new. Perfect. That's great.
Yep.
Well, let's get back to hockey, and let's jump into the Montreal Canadiens because as everybody at this point knows, Marc Bergevin fired, Scott Mellanby let go, and Jeff Gorton brought on as the hockey ops guy, essentially executive director, whatever you want to call him, the CEO. Lots of potential names that you could throw out to describe what he's going to do, but essentially, I think he's the executive vice president of hockey operations is his technical title, but he's the CEO of the Montreal Canadiens for all intents and purposes, and he's going to go out and find a GM who can speak French because he can't. That's pretty much the he was always the background guy in New York, and now. Here he is, trying now to be the background guy in Montreal, and I've heard a lot about how he doesn't like to have the FaceTime. That's why this is a great job for him. He'll have a GM and he'll have FaceTime. I do not buy that. How in the world in Montreal? Doesn't matter if you have some GM as a face in front of you. You don't think Jeff Gorton is going to be pressed and people are going to want to talk to him, and he's going to be somebody that is going to have a significant role in how this team is perceived? I don't see it in Montreal.
No, essentially they're the New York Yankees of the NHL, right? They're one of the most historic franchises ever, winningest franchise ever. So you think with the Canadian media the way they are, and I'm sure that, being a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, how crazy the media can get up there sometimes. And again, there's no hiding in any background when it comes to this sort of team, especially an Original Six franchise. Now, if he was, say, for example, taking over a team like gosh, I don't even like the Minnesota Wild or maybe even Arizona, for example. It would be, he could, probably disappear in the background a little bit, but
right.
There's no hiding here in Montreal.
No. Now, he was asked, what's your criteria for looking for a new GM? And his quote is this: somebody that has a great knowledge of hockey and an understanding of how the business works. We'll look at everything. What we want to do as a group is look at all candidates and pick the very best based on what they have. Maybe it's a person that doesn't have a ton of experience as a general manager, but what else do they have and what else can they bring to the table? How else can they help us look at different scenarios? And then he goes on saying maybe they'd be a little out of the box, and someone who compliments me is how he finishes that quote. I think if you kind of read between the lines, you see I want somebody who isn't like me, and we don't really care if they have a lot of experience because I'm going to be pulling the strings. Right? Like, he's the GM. He's just not going to be the face of the criticism. He's going to be he's looking for somebody who's going to be, yes, of course, you're not just bringing somebody in to be your bitch, but you're bringing somebody in who maybe has a different perspective, but also is going to probably essentially do what Jeff Gorton wants.
Yeah. He's not looking for anybody who's going to be pushing back on every decision, or is like, hey, you know what? I'm actually the GM. We're going to go this route. It's no. When you say someone who compliments me in a press interview, I mean, literally, you're stating I want somebody who's going to just be my whipping boy, but essentially still bring something to the table, right? I mean,
yes, the whipping boy is that sounds about right. There's several people that have been tossed around. There's been I think Daniel Briere's name has been thrown around. Yeah. There's quite a few. Obviously, like assistant general managers throughout the league. If you can speak French, then I think you've got a shot at this job. If you have some level of executive experience within an organization.
Yeah, but here's my question. I understand why the Canadiens are seeking somebody who speaks French, because they are a French-speaking province. I mean, that's their language, right? But at the same time, why does that have to be a criteria for you? I mean, I understand the media part of it, but you're really boxing out a lot of good candidates for general manager when you say they have to speak French, or we can't hire them. I mean, that's a little ridiculous in my mind. I think if you find somebody who's willing to learn to speak French, that would be awesome. But why? I mean, I never understood that, to me, especially in Montreal, why you have to speak French. I mean, it just, you limit it. I think that if you went to Montreal,
you would probably, or you talk to somebody who is French in Montreal, I think it's just it's a thing. You got to have someone.
I guess, yeah.
You got to have certain people in that organization that speak French, and I imagine as time goes along that maybe in the next generation it's going to become more like, okay, come on, we don't have to do this. But I think we're probably in the last, maybe the last generation of it being a requirement. But you have Jeff Gorton. And now you can go and you can find somebody who, again, is essentially like your face of the executive crew. He's gonna love if nobody talks about Jeff Gorton and that people just talk about the GM. And
right.
That guy needs to be somebody who can speak the local language, which I do understand. The head coach, I understand. I am more on the same page as you, because a head coach, there's only so many guys that you want the best guy, and you're talking about a team not necessarily made up of a bunch of people that speak French anyways. Like, look up and down Montreal's roster and figure out how many of those guys are fluent in French. I mean, it doesn't matter from maybe Jonathan Drouin and Cedric Paquette, Matthew Perreault. I don't know if Matthew Perreault, he's from Quebec, so I'm guessing that he speaks French. But there's your three guys who are born in Quebec, 3 players. Now, there's probably plenty of other players who English isn't their first language, but they know how to speak English. And
right.
to me, the head coach position matters far, far less. You probably need to have one position within your hierarchy of that team who can go talk to the media and speak in French. I understand that. The coach, I feel like that is a silly concept. Like, who cares? It has nothing to do with the team. It has everything to do with the fans. And I understand there's probably this like, well, I mean, hey, the fans are the people they're the reason why we are one of the richest teams in the league. But I think you could get away with a coach that doesn't speak French. But as long as there are really good coaches that speak French, they all want to go and coach the Montreal Canadiens, right? Like that's the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say too is winning solves a lot of problems. So if you're going to the Stanley Cup Finals or in the conference finals every year, really, I mean, no one's going to care in Montreal that the guy doesn't speak French anyway. So
yeah, exactly. And Montreal's struggles this year are, I think, less about team construction and more about, hey, their goalie's gone, their top defenseman's gone, they lost their top center, and if they wanted to keep their top center, it sounds like they should have done this sooner, because potentially Deneau would have stayed had Bergevin not been there. This is what I heard. So that this. What are you going to do? What team could lose their top center, their top defenseman, and their goaltender and not fall drastically in the standings? Not to mention the fact that Montreal wasn't exactly a regular season juggernaut. They had a great run, but they weren't winning President's trophies or anything in the way they were constructed, because they constantly were in that middle spot. Even when they were, just missing the playoffs, they would still be in the 18, 19, 20 range, and they never really got that super high draft pick that could have, given them some kind of superstar. So I wonder now if, maybe we see a couple years of tanking from the Canadiens if this is the way that it's going to go. I don't know.
Oof. Yeah, I kind of get that feeling too. I mean, listen, like you said, when you lose 3 centerpieces from your team, boy, that's tough to recover for any team. I mean, you look at what Pittsburgh, they were barely able to keep their head above water, and they just, obviously Sidney Crosby is on a whole nother level than, maybe any other one of those players right now, the way they're playing. But I mean, regardless, it's hard to be successful when you're missing 3 key pieces like that, let alone the rest of their team just doesn't really seem to be playing up to potential, right? I mean, you had, not only did they lose their, Philip Deneau, but they lost Kokeniemi too. So they lost really two top centers for this team, in my opinion. And so, again, any team's going to struggle losing that kind of quality, players down the ice. And so trying to recover, and really, I mean, they bring in Mike Hoffman. Well, yeah, that's, a guy who, again, can score some goals, but he's not a difference maker on the ice. He's not a guy who's going to drive a whole entire line or be a team, as far as, leading a team in points, that kind of production. So, and Jeff Petrie, I mean, he just kind of, I don't know what happened to him, man. He's just not having the same type of year. And it really seems to be the story with a lot of these other Canadian players. And, unfortunately it's kind of like, like you and I talked about a few years back, Calgary, everybody on their team having, career years. Now it seems like everybody in Montreal is having career low years right now. So
right.
They picked a bad time to all suck at the same time.
Yeah, or they picked a really good time.
Right, depending how you look at it, right? Because what's his face, Shane Wright coming out of the draft, maybe that's somebody. But unfortunately for Montreal, they don't even have their first-round pick. I mean,
that's true.
They traded that one away, so now they got to rely on Carolina to suck this year, which is not going to happen to get a good first-rounder.
No. Yeah, and you're right. That's the other, I guess, that tough part of, you traded away your first-round pick, so now, I mean, that went to to Arizona. Although I think no, there's a condition. The better of Montreal, Carolina's 2022 first round pick. But if either or both are top 10 picks, then Montreal will instead transfer to Arizona, the worse of Montreal and Carolina's 2022 first round pick. So Montreal does get to keep their pick if it's a top 10 pick, which it now looks like it will be. So so Arizona is going to get Carolina's pick, which, yeah, that looks like it's probably going to be, probably somewhere in the 20s, maybe closer to 30, depending on how this team does in the playoffs. They look real good. I mean, their last 10 games notwithstanding. All right, so Montreal, I mean, also on top of that, it sounded like Marc Bergevin was just done. He wanted a lot of money because the job requires a lot of stress, and so I understand, like, there was more or less, I think this was, I'm done. Like, this is just too much. It's tons of stress. COVID's been insane, and he's been there for 10 years. He was done, and then I think at the same time, Jeff Molson and him just kind of found themselves on different pages for the first time ever, because they were so tight for a long time that now it was more or less just, we're not going to re-sign him, so why would we keep him on for the rest of the year when we can bring in Jeff Gorton, who obviously did a really nice job with the Rangers rebuild. Granted, he's not going to get credit for it. It's going to be Chris Drury who gets the credit, but let's be honest, this Rangers rebuild is almost all Jeff Gorton, and he's responsible for bringing in Artemi Panarin, for drafting and having the guts to tell Rangers fans, we're going to be bad. And in return, they got Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere. Like, they set themselves up to be really good in the future. And the Adam Fox deal, don't forget about that one. So he's got a lot of deals in his history where he was able to take a team that was middling and tank them and then bring them back to glory. I guess, granted, he did get a little lucky with that Lafreniere pick, because that was the weird draft thing where they got that pick even though they made the playoffs or whatever.
Right, they jumped up like 10 spots.
Yeah. So Montreal, we'll see what happens to them. The rest of the year, though, I think is a wash. They're going nowhere, especially now. There's really no rush for Carey Price to come back, and I did see that they are starting a program for their players, for like a mental health program for their players and people in their organization, because they're going, people in our organization are not mentally healthy. Why? And I think that the stress in Montreal probably just, you need that little extra layer of accountability and help. And I wonder if other organizations with a higher pressure gauge, like a Toronto, depending on the year, like a Vancouver, basically every Canadian team needs their own team of psychologists or something, or psychiatrists. So we'll see what happens with that. What team do you think is most likely to pull a Montreal right now and go and fire a lot of people?
I think you already just mentioned their name in there, and I want to throw Vancouver out there, their name into the hat, because, man, this team lacks identity right now. This team lacks a lot of things. And, it's funny. I was listening to Sirius XM the other day, NHL Radio, love listening to that on the drive into work. But they mentioned particularly that they have one guy on this roster that they think, okay, if everybody could play like this guy, this team would be so successful. That's JT Miller. Love everything this dude brings to the team. And so when I look at him and then looking at the rest of the team, I kind of now see what they're talking about when I'm like, man, nobody else. I mean, it's very rare. I think maybe outside of Bo Horvat, there's not very many players on this team where I look at it and like, okay, you're not hustling out there. You're not moving your feet. You just you really lack that extra step that I think a lot of successful teams seem to have, or a lot of successful players seem to have. When I look at other guys like Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, they just seem to lack that hustle, that intensity that I wish this team could bring. And then, of course, to me, I think Travis Green is starting to lose the locker room a little bit. It seems like, the players just really aren't enjoying playing for him anymore. I don't know. I just kind of get that sense. I don't really have any real reason to back it up other than just a gut feeling, really. But, I think this is a team that's poised to eventually see some big changes, because when you look again at the names, the roster on paper, you think, okay, this team could and should be a, at least a playoff bubble contender team. But really, they've been faltering, and I think without Thatcher Demko back there and JT Miller, they'd be in a lot worse than they actually were. And after again this season bringing on a guy like Connor Garland and OEL, I think they again should have been more successful than what they are right now.
They're definitely regretting the OEL trade very, very quick. A lot quicker than I thought they would. Now, see, the one thing with Vancouver, when it comes to, we all know you got to shoot the puck to score, and generally, teams that are high in shots on goal are successful. Like when you look at the top 10 teams, actually top 11 teams in the shots for category, you will find 10 playoff teams. And the only team that's in there that is not a playoff team are the Vancouver Canucks. So you wonder, the Vegas Golden Knights aren't a playoff team either. They're 11.
They will be.
But they will be, yeah. But Vancouver is 8th in shots for. So they're producing some level of offense. Now, I guess I'm not looking at like high danger chances because they've been losing so often. They may be throwing the puck to the net. But the fact that they are scoring at such a low pace but shooting so often shows that like there may be a level of luck that has played against them. Because when you shoot the puck a lot, you score. Like there's a certain percentage that you're going to score, and they're just not doing it right now. A 65.9% penalty kill. How are you going to compete when when other teams? If you get 3 power plays in a game, they're scoring once. Like you are. It's terrible. So, that's probably the biggest issue there is they can't kill a penalty. And they're down with Winnipeg, Arizona, Montreal, Ottawa as the top 5 worst PKs in the league. And you're not going to survive that way, especially when it's not like their power play is special either. Their power play is at 17.4, so they're 20th in the league in power play. So your special teams are probably worst in the NHL overall. That right there is what's going to kill you. Like you can be pretty good 5-on-5, and if you can't do it at all on a special teams, you're going to need some pretty special things to help you to win, and that's just not happening for Vancouver. Which you're right, when you talk about coaching, it seems as though special teams are the most coached area of the game. Like it's the area where you on a PK, where you're supposed to be. There's 4 guys on the ice. You make a box, you make a diamond, whatever it is your style is, and you know where to go when the puck goes to a certain place. Like it's a pretty methodical way of killing a penalty. There's not generally a ton of just go out there and see what happens, as opposed to 5-on-5, which you do have a little more freedom. And then the same thing, the power play. The power play is very methodical. Guys know where to be, and you know what shots to take, and you know the percentages of high danger chances and how to get the puck to those danger chances. And Vancouver's just not really doing it. So that to me says you are right. The coaches have just lost this team. Nobody's doing or following the method that has been laid out, whether that's because they just don't want to, or people have just lost the room completely. But it sure looks like Vancouver is about to go ham on their coaching staff, on their GM. Like I think that probably Travis Green, what's the point in firing him right now? I don't know. I think you got like I can't imagine that this executive branch of the Montreal Canadiens lasts much longer.
Yeah, when you look at Travis Green, he's been there now for 4+ years, and he's never, maybe think 5 years now at this point, but he's never finished higher than fourth place. And you, again, like I mentioned earlier, when you look at the talent on paper he has in front of him, he should have a team, especially in such what, coming into the season we thought was a pretty weak Pacific Division. He should have been able to take charge or take advantage of that, and really hasn't been able to seize the opportunity. It's not like, outside of losing Chris Tanev, I think really this team hasn't lost any major pieces to where they would take such a drastic step backwards as far as, sitting in 8th place in the Pacific Division right now. Seattle is what it is. I think they've been on a little bit of a hot streak, but still they're going to be at the bottom of that division. And you look at other teams like San Jose, for some reason decided to start winning. Anaheim just came out of nowhere, but for some reason Vancouver just decided to just go completely opposite of Anaheim and just tank to the bottom right now.
Well, and I do think that this to me is, it's as much as it is on Travis Green, it's on Jim Benning. I think it's pretty obvious he needs to go. He's been there. This is his 8th season, and he's made the playoffs twice. And one of those times was like, I think both those playoff appearances, in the beginning of the season, it was like, Vancouver's not going to be very good. And then it was like, oh, Vancouver squeaked into the playoffs. Wow. And they won that one round. They've won one round, right? Like, in his 8 years. That's not enough. And
no.
And based on the team that, yes, you're right, on paper, this team looks really good. But it's clear that's happened before. Every time the Canucks are good on paper, something is going wrong. And it just, I don't think that it can continue with Jim Benning at the helm, and it, to me, looking like he's got to go, and some new life needs to be breathed into that organization. And maybe it's maybe that's Scott Mellenby, who was let go by the Montreal Canadiens as the assistant GM out there. I think that he would be a really good fit, and he was able to draft a lot of good players late for Montreal, and I think you may see Vancouver is going to have some high draft picks here, so Scott Mellenby would be a good pick. I don't anyone else that you would look at out there in Vancouver to come in and save the organization.
Vancouver, man, at this point, just roll the dice. For me, when you look at what Jim Benning's brought in and brought out right now, you lose Jacob Markstrom, who's now looking like he's at the top of the Vezina pool as far as candidates with him and, other guys like Jack Campbell and Bobrovsky. But, Chris Tanev looks like a revelation in Calgary. Speaking of, his metrics are off the chart and just so good as analytics right now for that team. And so bringing in OEL, who's looked like a disaster, again, I think you could almost bring in anybody else at this point, and they're probably going to do a better job.
Yeah. Okay. Vancouver on the chopping block there. We'll axe them off. What other team do you look at right now and say, well, we were going to talk the New York Islanders because they've lost now 10 in a row.
Yes.
But Barry Trotz is not getting fired. Lou Lamoriello not getting fired. We know, like, not for this season. I thought that they would put some decent things together because they finally got some home games. 0-4-1 at home, so things not looking good for the Islanders in New York. Something's going on with this team. Now, I know it looks like they're like way in last place, but really they've played 7 fewer games than Montreal, 5 fewer than Buffalo. Like, there are some teams ahead of them that have played a lot more games. So I think that'll work itself out. But this is supposed to be the defensive team of the league, right? Like, they're top 5. Barry Trotz came in and turned them into a defensive juggernaut. And all of a sudden, this looks like the year before they, got good, because the New York Islanders cannot score for their life. I guess defensively they haven't been awful, but 36 goals in 19 games. That's less than 2 goals a game.
Yeah, right? You talk about a league that the last 3 or 4 years trending upwards as far as goals for, per game, and as far as totals between two teams, right? It's always been on the uptick, and now all of a sudden we're seeing it kind of plateau a little bit. And I think teams like the Islanders aren't helping that cause because, again, I think coming into this season, a lot lot of, writers, a lot of, talent out there in the NHL community really picked the Islanders to be, one of the teams to compete for the top spot in the Metro Division. I mean, Washington's been a revelation. I didn't think they were going to be this good. But again, Rangers, Carolina, I had them up there towards the top. So no surprise there. But the Islanders being at the bottom, granted, again, 4 or 5 games less than all the other teams in this division. But, points withstanding, still their winning percentage is just, again, dead last in this division. And so when you talk about goals for, that's the biggest concern this team has right now, I think, because they're, they still have quality goaltending. They still have good defensemen back there. But when you're scoring less than 2 goals a game, you're not going to win any games at all. And it's absolutely clear. And it was funny last night. I was watching the Red Wings and, they finally managed to score a few goals, more than 2, but they just can't pull out the win at this point. And, going down their roster here, I'm looking at, guys, Zach Parisi hasn't scored a goal. I mean, none of their defensemen seem to have scored any goals at all either. Noah Dobson, Adam Palic, Zdeno Chara, no goals at all either. I mean, I'm going to give Chara a pass here just because, his ice time and stuff. But, outside of, Wahlstrom, Barzell, and Nelson, who, I'm surprised Nelson's leading this team in goals right now. But
and Anders Lee has 4 goals in 14 games. That's not awful. Over the course of a full regular season, that's a 25 goal season. That's about where Anders Lee generally sits.
Sure, yeah, but and then again too, when you talk about goals for, again, I don't put a lot of weight into plus minus, but there's only one person on this entire team that is above even. So that's concerning, especially when you talk about goals for. And Brock Nelson, like I mentioned, who's leading this team in goals, he's shooting at almost 23% right now. So that's going to come down at some point too. So they gotta pick up the slack somewhere else, because I think eventually he'll start falling off as far as shooting percentage goes. So someone's got to pick up the slack, and it doesn't look clear like anybody can do it. Yeah.
It's this is what I'm wondering. The way that they play is a very methodical, very systematic, and it requires, I think, certain players, of course, because you need guys who are all about the team. And I think they have that, but I think that it's been several years of the same thing. And I think that just wears on guys. Like, I think it's a really hard place to play when you're essentially you're asking guys who are not quite as good to play above their potential because they're playing in this system and it works. But how long does it work for? Like, these types of teams, we tend to see this type of dip. Like, I'd say, if we're gonna go back and look at other teams that are similar to this New York Islanders team, where they're, very good defensively, not a lot of superstars. I think you could kind of look at the Columbus Blue Jackets for a little bit, where they were well coached. They, players did emerge as really good. Granted, they did have Artemi Panarin, but the Columbus Blue Jackets kind of were like that group of a bunch of second and third line players, and they managed to do that for a little while. I mean, I think that the height of maybe what the New York Islanders are is very similar to the Dallas Stars, where the Dallas Stars, yes, they have Seguin. I don't even classify Jamie Benn as a superstar anymore. Like, I think Jamie Benn is your he's a little bit better.
Third line center.
Yeah, I mean, he's on maybe like 2 years ago Kyle Palmieri kind of track. He's fine. He's a good player, but he's definitely not your dominant guy anymore. So you've got Tyler Seguin, which, I mean, the Islanders have Matthew Barzell. So I'd compare them a lot to Dallas, where Dallas has had those, like last year, Dallas just couldn't put together a string of wins. And despite being a good defensive team, they struggle to score goals. And I think that you see those. I mean, they made the Stanley Cup Finals. But those teams that are really well coached in a system, I think they just have those off years because there's not the talent to come and scoop you up when you need it. Like, in Colorado, was anyone worried when Colorado was like second to last in that division? No, because there's so much talent there that they'll figure it out. But when you have a team that's just you're relying on a system, you're gonna have these weird years where like things aren't working and you have to kind of go back to the drawing board and put your system back together. And I think with the Islanders, I mean, Kyle Palmieri, fail. Jean-Gabriel Pageau, that hasn't been the great success this year that maybe you're hoping. I mean, he's making good money, and last year 28 points in 54 games. That's fine for what he is doing, but 1 goal in 18 games. It's just he hasn't been very good this year, which is another signing from Lamoriello. Zach Parisi obviously struggling. I don't think that he was really coming in to be a savior anyways, but more or less a big name and somebody who you thought would contribute a little bit, can't score. Zdeno Chara hasn't been that good. I wonder if this is his final year. He'll probably get dealt. They'll deal him back to Boston or something like that for Boston's run. But yeah, overall, they just nothing's kind of clicking for them, and I think those signings are kind of just setting them back, and I think you'll find they'll hit the reset button and they'll be back next year. But I think this season's probably a wash for them, especially having to start the year on the road. Like, there's just been a lot of weird factors for the Islanders.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I mean, again, they need scoring. The one thing I think about with the Islanders, and again, this team built for the playoffs, right? But obviously you have to get there first. And when I look at this team, their roster makeup up and down, and say this continues beyond this season where they struggle to score and they have issues, I look at a guy like Matthew Barzal, and I think at 24 right now, how long is he going to want to hang around for something like this before he starts raising his hand and says, hey, you know what? I know I'm an RFA in a year and a half, 2 years, but can you move me now? Because when Barzal first came into the league, he was explosive, a little dynamic. We were always talking about his speed and ability to score, go to the net, that sort of stuff. But now he's kind of bought into that Barry Trotz system, which has had good success over the last couple of years. But when you're not scoring goals, and if this continues, these struggles here, at what point does a guy like Barzal, who has so much dynamic offensive capabilities, does he get frustrated and say, hey, you know what, I got to go somewhere where I can actually shine a little bit more and not have to worry so much about both ends of the ice to where I'm, putting up mediocre numbers? Because again, guys like that, they want to score, they want to have good totals at the end of the year and not just, make the playoffs every year.
Right. Let's go across the pond here for a minute. I wanted to talk about the New Jersey Devils because they're another team that's struggling, not in the way that like the Islanders or the Canadiens are struggling. They're 500, 2-6-2 in their last 10, but they'll probably they'll find their way back to like hover around 500 right now. And I'm looking at Lindy Ruff. I'm looking at the job that he's doing there thus far, and I'm just not really that impressed with what he's doing as the New Jersey Devils coach. They finished 7th. I mean, it just seems like nobody's really playing above their potential right now. This isn't a great coaching job per se. This is just kind of like, well, yeah, the Devils were supposed to be like okay, and the Devils are okay, and we're not gonna talk about the fact that they're just okay. Like Jack Hughes, in my mind, he should be doing better than he is right now. I think Nico Hischier, you love what he can bring to the table as that defensive center. 3 goals in 22 games. I know Jack Hughes has been hurt, and he only got to play 5 games, which is going to hurt any organization when probably your best center isn't, or one of your best centers isn't playing. But overall, don't you just look at this team and go, man, something's not clicking, in terms of winning games. And I'll be honest, I haven't watched very much Devils this year. Mackenzie Blackwood hasn't looked great in the games that I've watched. What's going on with the Devils? And are we in territory where Lindy Ruff could get fired, or are we more like, we're going to give it one more year. He's only in his second year, and that third year will be very telling.
Yeah, I think right now we're at the point where they're going to still give him more time. Like you mentioned, Jack Hughes, having been hurt for quite a while, he's a guy who, this team went out. You look at his numbers and you say, okay, last year, 31 points in 56 games. Prior to that, 21 points in 61 games. But they managed to give him a huge extension at $8 million. That's telling to me that they think the world of this guy, that they think eventually he's going to be, a $10-11 million player here in the next couple of years. So they want to go ahead and just get the savings now, right? But again, 4 points through 5 games, 3 goals. I think when healthy, Jack Hughes is a legit, and he will be, I think, after this season's over, I think he'll be a legit number one center. He'll grow into that role for the rest of the season. But in the meantime, I think this team is going to kind of middle out. They're going to be, they're going to be in games, but they're not going to win too many games, and especially with that division being as tough as it is. And I think this team's got a lot of good pieces, but there are a lot of other pieces where I say, you know what, they're just not playing to their potential. I look at PK Subban, has not looked that great to me this year. Again, you mentioned it, Mackenzie Blackwood. I'm very, very high on this guy as a starting goaltender.
Oh, I know you are. Yeah, I know that you're high on me.
But you know what? I think that's this team just having dealt with injuries in and out through most of the year so far, and their defense to me just isn't really playing up to snuff to where I would expect this team on paper. Dougie Hamilton's been good. I've been fine with him, but the rest of the team on defense, I'm just like, you look at a guy like Ty Smith last year. He was kind of a revelation. He was, a Calder Trophy candidate, but just sort of has been below average this season, I think is a good way to put it. And, so has the rest of most of that New Jersey defense. And so, when you're not getting the greatest defense, when you're just getting average goaltending right now, Jonathan Bernier has been fine. Mackenzie Blackwood's been fine, but they haven't been good. They haven't been great. Of course, you're going to struggle. You're going to kind of middle out there. Now, luckily for them, they've also had some really nice surprises this year. I think Dawson Mercer's has been just incredible to watch. He's been so much fun. I think right now he's sitting third or fourth in rookie scoring right now behind a couple Red Wings. And then Andre Janssen, he's been playing fantastic, and I don't know how long he's going to be able to keep that up. But, again, it's been nice to see him have some success, especially with Jack Hughes being out. And, hopefully some other guys step up, have some more success. And I think, as this team moves forward, they're still in my mind, rebuilding. I think they're still a year or two away from really being a serious team. So when you get PK's, $9 million coming off the books next year, and you don't really have any other, big name guys you have to sign to huge contracts, they can go out next year and spend a couple bucks, bring in maybe 1 or 2 good free agents here, middle 6, top 6 guys, or maybe shore up that back end a little bit more. And now you have a team that, is ready to compete in the division, because eventually I'm hoping that Ovechkin slows down at some point to give other teams a shot here in the Metro. But, the way he wants to go after Gretzky's numbers, I don't think that's going to happen in the next few years. So
yeah, I think he wants another cup. I think that's probably goal number 1. Yes, the Devil. I mean, Dougie Hamilton's been he's been Dougie Hamilton. He's been pretty good too. Now, when you look at the Metro, there's probably a team just below New Jersey that is actually in this like something's happening here, and that's the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, they did just. It wasn't that long ago that they fired people, so it's kind of hard to fire the GM. Now, he's not going anywhere, but the coaching staff, that might be another a different conversation. Claude Giroux is playing fine. The kind of the swap out Cam Atkinson for Jakub Voracek, that's been okay. Couturier hasn't really played that great, only 5 goals in 21 games, and really they're just not getting much depth scoring. I mean, Van Riemsdyk, 2 goals. Ryan Ellis has been hurt. That definitely hurts, but Keith Yandel brought in to kind of be that power play specialist. He only has the 5 points. Ristolainen, he hasn't been great. There's just been a lot of, well, I haven't been that good. That move hasn't turned out that well for this team. What's going on in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I think they're trying, desperately to get Giroux a cup here, right? And so, really, I think the pieces they brought in, the coaching, I just don't think it's blended well enough yet. I think at this point, last year they made a whole bunch of moves. When you don't have a guy like Ryan Ellis, for example, in the lineup, who's so good at moving the puck and making that first pass to get it out of the zone, that's going to hurt. Yeah, obviously you're going to spend a lot more time in your defensive end when you can't move it out. And again, outside of Provorov, there really aren't any other guys on this defense that I think can really or have done, I guess I should say, have done a good job of moving the puck out quickly. So when you're spending more time in your defensive zone, obviously that's going to hurt you. Martin Jones, I mean, he's, speaking of defensive zones, he's been looking pretty good this year. No complaints there. Carter Hart, he's been playing fine. So you're getting decent goaltending. Your defense isn't playing great. And then, like you mentioned, depth scoring's not there. That really, to me, falls on coaching. I think really the system that they're trying to play versus where these guys actually are is not really blending well. And I think at some point you have to pull the trigger and maybe make some moves here, move some guys out, maybe just eat a couple $1 million in cap to say, for example, like moving a JVR. Maybe if you're willing to eat a couple $1 million, maybe you get somebody to take a bite or a flyer on that.
He just has I guess with 2 years left on that deal, yeah, you definitely could afford to probably eat $2 or $3 million of that deal. I guess three and a half would be half of it.
Listen, maybe you're willing to move out a younger guy and JVR and maybe send him to a place like Arizona where you've got a guy like Phil Kessel who's still capable. In my mind now, he's not going to be a line driver, a Patrick Kane or anybody like that, but he still can come in and has something to bring to this team, and he could be, a revelation on the wing because, again, I look at a guy like Travis Konechny, for example, who should be, a 25, 30 goal scorer for this team, and he's not doing it right now. Again, I think that all comes down to coaching because he's got the talent and the ability, I think, to be able to be a 25 goal scorer in this league. But for whatever reason, he's just not getting it done this year.
Yeah, I think there wasn't a big level of panic for the Flyers like 2 weeks ago, and now suddenly the Pittsburgh Penguins are rolling. They've moved themselves into a playoff spot. They jumped over Philadelphia, and now they're sitting 7 points up on the Flyers. I mean, the Flyers are 7 points out of a playoff spot, and that is a terribly difficult 7 points to jump. I mean, we're 3 weeks away from Christmas, and we know Thanksgiving generally, if you're not in the playoffs, it's going to be very difficult to get in there. Now, I know Pittsburgh and Detroit both sitting in the playoffs. They have played 3 and 4 games more than the Flyers, but those are still games you have to win. And even if they did win those 3 games that they have in hand, they're still not in the playoffs. So, the Flyers are in a real, real tough position. The chances of them making the playoffs at this point, probably somewhere in the 15 to 20% chance. So you're not looking at good odds to get in there, especially the way they're playing. And sadly for Carter Hart, it's not because of Carter Hart. Carter Hart's actually played really good.
Right.
He's Martin Jones is having his best year in like 5 years.
It's crazy.
3 or 4 years. So the Flyers, from a defensive standpoint, have not been bad, especially from that goaltending standpoint. But the team itself is just not really playing as a team, and that's going to be a problem. And I think you're right. I think there either needs to be personnel changes, or Alain Vigneault needs to be let go. And it's hard because he's only been there since April 2019. So he's coached 125 games. He's got 66 of those are wins. He's got almost a 600 winning percentage. So you can't fault the guy on that. And he's been relatively successful in the playoffs that he's been a part of. So they're kind of in this spot where you have to let this season ride, and I think your only choice is to go out and see what you can kind of shake up from the roster. And we know that Philadelphia has no problem shaking up the roster a little bit, like bringing in those guys, but it'll be very, very difficult, especially Penguins are going to start getting healthy here. And they're going to be fine. Like clearly they've been able to do exactly what we said they had to do. They had to hold their head above water until they were able to get healthy again. And they did exactly that. They have been able to keep themselves well above water while they waited for Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin to get back. And we're starting to see how good this team can be even without those guys. So it's going to be. Not to mention, and Boston, Boston is.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Boston, they're coming and they're going to make a push, and especially like Detroit, right? I don't know at the end of the year if they're going to be a playoff team or not, but still.
They've won 5 games in a row.
Right. So, you've got to fend off Boston as well, too, because at this point, Philly's not going to push for one of those top 3 spots. So they're going to be pushing for a wild card spot. And Boston's going to have something to say about that So they've got an uphill battle to climb.
Well, and do you really think that the Islanders are going to be this bad all year? No, I don't think so.
True.
I think that they'll move themselves up the standings. And the Flyers are going to play the Islanders. They're in the same division, so those games are going to become more tough. Columbus is still ahead of them. And Columbus is a team that is just, they're not going to go away. They aren't that great, but they're not a team that you're just going to walk in and take an easy 2 points from. They're going to be a team that probably hovers around the playoffs all year long until maybe, when they go, well, we're not going to do anything if we randomly did make the playoffs, so we're going to make some moves. We're going to shake the roster up and try to get some assets moving into next year. And if they do that, maybe Max Domi's gone. A Scott Harrington could be dealt. You've got maybe even a Gus Nyquist is dealt with only 2 years left on his deal. So there are some pieces that they could move out. And there's also the fact that Patrick Laine is on IR, Korpisalo's on IR. Like this team hasn't gotten any love from the injury bug as well, and they are still kind of in the playoff race. Surprisingly, it's because they're scoring. We're not used to a Columbus team that's scoring their way out of problems. But yeah, they actually are doing pretty well from a scoring standpoint. So the Flyers have a lot of adversity ahead, and I just don't, with their current roster and the way that they've been playing, I don't see them digging their way out, and we're going to be left with, this off season where they're going to have to probably make even bigger changes than they made last year.
Yep.
Well, any other team you want to hit on before we call it?
No, I just want to mention Vegas is, speaking of teams, Vegas has got to be pretty happy. Jack Campbell started skating. So that's been great.
Jack Campbell does play for the Maple Leafs. But.
Right. Jack Eichel's been skating, so looks like things are trending in the right direction. And Chicago, Tyler Johnson decided to go out and get the exact same neck surgery. So now a second guy's done it, and we'll see if this trend continues with people having issues and wanting to elect their own surgeries, which will be great. So
yeah, especially when it's something Vegas. Proven. You don't want to go to some witch doctor and have them do something, right. But when it's something that's been proven to work, it's crazy to why wouldn't you want your players to have a surgery that has evidence of having a far better recovery rate and the percentage that you recover at than an older surgery just because you haven't heard of it? That's so crazy to me.
It blows my mind.
The fact that the Buffalo Sabres pushed that hard against it says to me that there's some level of just idiotic pride that is going to keep that organization in the dirt. To me, it all came down to a pride thing, because at one, I remember seeing Kevin Adams say something like, we maybe it was you can't now you can't just give in That's the once you've put your foot in the sand to go, well, okay, never mind. We've changed our tune. Then people are going to go, see, all we have to do is just wait it out, and the Sabres will do what we want them to do. And that'll spill over into contract negotiations. I'm sure that crossed their mind. That, well,
for sure.
And so, but it was boneheaded. It had nothing to do with contracts. It was a guy's health, and it was a guy's health beyond his playing career as the rest of his freaking life. And if you're not willing to budge on that, you just wonder. Like, I think that good things tend to happen to like, when you exist in the way that you do business, you treat people well. That's going to play out in a lot of different ways over the years, and I just wonder, if that's the way that the Sabres are doing business, I think it's going to bite them in the ass, and that we're looking at a team that is just going to sit in the bottom of the league for a long, long time until something very drastic changes there. Sorry, Buffalo Sabres fans. That's what I. that's where I think it's sitting, and you're not going to do much when you're allowing 90 goals in 24 games. You're at almost 4 goals a game. Yikes. Well, Justin, is this your last show, or do you have more shows?
We got 2 shows today, and that's it.
All right, we'll have a good last 2 shows. I'll say break a leg. And the good thing is that you have no chance of that happening because you sit, right? Oh, do you sit the whole time, or you move around? Are you one of the green men?
Oh no! I'm sitting in the pit playing the drums and the orchestra the whole time.
There we go. Just don't just break a leg. And we'll talk this week. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you guys soon.